Okay, hello and welcome back to our lectures on the Exalted Treatise on the Response of the Tao. Now today we're going to look at two passages. And the first passage is, I'm going to share my slide. Hope everyone can see. It's this sentence: be compassionate towards all creatures. Now, compassion is generally referred to as love, a type of love. But you might ask, why doesn't the Exalted Treatise use the word love or loving instead of compassionate? Why does it use the word compassionate? Well, one reason is because love, the word love, is used to denote, generally speaking, an emotional response. And emotional responses can often change from moment to moment. But compassion here is really referring to a more constant and unconditional form of love, a love that's rooted in wisdom. Now I'll stop presenting this slide. Okay. And we can think of this compassion as the love of a parent for their child. In fact, traditionally, the word compassionate or compassion was very much associated with the parental role in the Chinese context. So you could say that our parents were the very first to show us what compassion, unconditional love really means. I mean, if you think about it, each and every one of us, we come into this world with nothing at all. And yet our parents love us enough to care for us when we need it the most. They look after us in sickness when we're ill, and obviously before we're toilet trained. They even go without sleep, as new parents do. So you could say that, well, parents instinctively will selflessly care for and be compassionate towards their infant child. So I think a key word here is selfless. And certainly when we look at the commentary to the Exalted Treatise, the compassion that the Exalted Treatise envisages here is really about being selfless and caring for the living things around us. So on a day-to-day basis, it might start with being a bit more considerate and thoughtful to the people around us. We can try to think more from their perspective, put ourselves in their shoes, and we might ask ourselves questions like, well, how do we feel if they used the same tone of voice that we're using? So really it starts with applying the golden rule of reciprocity, the idea that what we don't do to others, what we would not wish for ourselves. So you could say that's a starting point for being compassionate towards all creatures. Now, broadly speaking, there are two aspects to compassion. The first is where we try to help alleviate the suffering of others. Now, for example, a person could be experiencing illness, or suffering some sort of hardship. And, if there's any way that we can try to help lessen that suffering, that is part of compassion. That's the first aspect. The other aspect is when we refrain from causing harm and injury to the lives around us. So this could be, for example, looking out for the insects and trying not to step on at least the visible ones when we next take a walk, for example, or doing something to help those whose lives are in danger So, for example, some people might buy the live fish at a fish market and set them free so they don't end up on a plate. Some people might buy the hens save hens from the cage to life on a battery farm. So, the idea of being compassionate towards all creatures is clearly not just limited to looking after the animals. Okay, now being compassionate towards living creatures, by being compassionate, we're actually cultivating the good deeds that will bring rewards like enjoying a healthy, long life, good health and longevity. And this is something that, well, if you think about it, this is a good deed. It's clearly doing the opposite of what you may remember we read earlier in the Exalted Treatise about, when a person commits misdeeds, their life expectancy gets reduced by anything from units of 100 days to 12 years. So, and then they have to suffer all sorts of misfortune as well. Well, here, being compassionate is clearly a good deed. So it's sort of the reverse. Instead of getting our life expectancy reduced, it'll be extended, and we get to enjoy good health and longevity in due course of time. Okay, now this particular sentence, be compassionate towards all creatures, it sort of really makes me think about Mother Teresa of Singapore. It's the late Teresa Xu, who's known as the Mother Teresa of Singapore. And you may have heard of her already, but for those of you who don't know, Teresa was trained as a professional nurse. She lived a very simple, very frugal life, but certainly it was a life that was totally dedicated to caring for the elderly and the sick, to loving the neglected and the abandoned, and sharing with the poor and the needy in the community. For example, Teresa founded the Home for the Aged Sick. This is one of the first homes in Singapore that looked after the elderly and the ill who lacked the means or lacked the family relatives to look after them. So that's pretty significant. And she also set up a charity called Heart to Heart that still continues to this day. And that is specifically a charity that reaches out to the poor and the needy in the community, and they provide sort of food and monetary assistance on a monthly basis. So it's an ongoing thing as well. So what was her sort of routine like? Well, every day, Teresa would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, so very early, and she would spend the whole day looking after the elderly and some of the most disadvantaged in the community. And then she would go home and read until very late at night. And when she was asked, where all of her caring and compassionate, where does it all come from? What makes a person get up every day from very early in the morning, working very late at night, and serving so many people, some of the most disadvantaged in society? Well, she said, I must have got it from my mother, because she was totally dedicated to the job she chose to do, and that was looking after our family. I think that trait was passed down to us, so meaning her and her siblings. I have no family, so I look after everyone else. I choose to serve everybody who comes to me. That is my job. The world is my home. All living beings are my family, my brothers and sisters, and selfless service is my religion. So that sort of gives us an idea of her life philosophy. And so Teresa devoted her whole life to tirelessly caring for those who were less fortunate. And even in the final days of her life, her own life, was sort of busy helping the senior citizens in Singapore. I think all of whom were much younger than herself. In 2011, Teresa passed away very peacefully. She passed away at the age of 113. And she was actually the oldest living person in Singapore at the time of her death. So, Teresa, with her shining example, really shows us that, we can enjoy good health and longevity. And this is certainly achievable by thinking more about others and living with unconditional love for our fellow human beings. I think it's a very inspirational example. And, 2011, that's less than 10 years ago. So it's a contemporary example for us all. I'd like to share with you another, this is a historical account. It's a true story. It's a story of a Buddhist master, and he could foretell that one of the novice monks at the monastery had only 7 more days to live. Now, the novice monk was a young fellow, and he seemed healthy, but he was just destined for a short life, and he didn't know this about himself. But so master told the novice monk, a novice monk is just a beginner, he instructed the novice monk to go home and spend some time with his family, and then come back to the monastery after 8 days. So bear in mind that the novice monk had only about 7 days to live, 7 more days of life. So what happened? Well, the novice monk did just as he was instructed, and after 8 days he came right back to the monastery. So you can probably imagine how surprised the master was to see the novice. But the master could tell right away that the novice monk had obviously done some major good deeds and accumulated great merits during his time away. So he immediately asks the novice monk, what he'd been up to, what have you been doing? And the novice monk is a little bit surprised. He said, well, I was just at home, looking after my parents, spending time with the family, didn't do anything special. And then the Buddhist master then asks, but what about on the way home or on the way from home, to and from home? And this was then that the novice sort of remembered. He remembered that, along the way, as he was making his way home, there was heavy rain. And it looked like the rainwater was about to submerge an ant nest, so a whole nest of ants. So, what did he do? He took some soil and built a bit of a barrier to protect the ants. So he effectively saved the lives of all of the ants in that nest. And so his master explained to him that, you originally had only 7 more days to live. Now, but because of this one act of kindness, you've saved so many lives, countless lives, that your own life has now been extended to, over 70 years of age. So, as we know, life is a life, and, life is precious, no matter how small. I think this is a really interesting account. It was originally recorded in what's known as the Miscellaneous Treasures Sutta among the Buddhist scriptures. So it was originally written in Sanskrit and then translated into Chinese during the 4th century. And then this account found its way into the annotation of a Taoist text. And the Taoist text is actually called Lord Winchung's Essay on Quiet Merits. And like the Exalted Treatise, this essay became very part of the popular literature. It became very popular, like the Exalted Treatise in late imperial China and continues to be read by young and old to this very day. So I think, historical accounts like the story, they've survived throughout time because they carry such important messages. And you could say, what does the story tell us? I think it tells us at least two things. One, it tells us that taking care of the world essentially starts with protecting life. This heart of compassion and caring for all life. Yes, it's certainly about protecting life, not harming, but it also extends, if you sort of delve a little bit deeper, it extends to ensuring that what we say and do doesn't cause others to feel worried or upset or afraid or unhappy, things like that. That is also part of being compassionate to, all creatures. And clearly, every little bit counts. In a day-to-day basis, it even applies to how we park our car. I can think of, the other day, I just happened to be with a neighbour who lives sort of further down the road. And she's in her 70s. She still drives. She was driving her car out of a driveway. And it just so happened that, on the one side, there was a rather large Range Rover that was parked it wasn't blocking the driveway, but it was very close. And it also happened to be the day of curbside rubbish collection. So everyone had their wheelie bins out, right? So you can imagine this old lady who's trying to maneuver her car safely out of her driveway in a very tight space. And she was, complained really loudly. She said, I don't know how people drive these days. How do they park their car? We didn't recognize the Range Rover, this big four-wheel drive. It wasn't any of our neighbours' cars. And the driver had left the car, so he obviously couldn't move it at the time. But, without thinking too much, just by parking your car in a slightly inconvenient position, it means that you've actually caused inconvenience for others. And that's, might count as a misdeed. Now, that driver of that Range Rover might not even realise. So it sort of being this heart of compassion for all creatures, all life, it sort of extends to our day-to-day as well. Now, that's one thing. The other thing to take away, I suppose, is the fact that a compassionate mind is really the key to good health and longevity. That you could say that the overall most important factor is our thoughts and our attitude to life. Yes, diet, exercise, what we eat, what we do, regular exercise, lifestyle, these are all important factors. But, above all of those things, I think that, our thoughts, what we think about, and our overall attitude, they determine all of the above. They determine what we eat, our diet, what we do, including our exercise, and our lifestyle generally. And through the shining example of Sister Teresa in Singapore, she lived very simply. She devoted, I'd say, most of her waking hours to caring for the people most uncared for in society, and from a volunteer capacity as well. And when you look at the example of the novice monk, he was just traveling home. It wasn't anything that he didn't plan to do any major good deeds. He noticed that the ant nest was about to be submerged, and he just did so. Didn't even have to give it a second thought. Just did what he could, tried to help however he could. And it's this attitude, this willingness, and this heart of compassion and caring for others. I think that is key to being healthy and achieving a long life. Okay, well, there's actually another historical account, and this one relates to a scholar by the name of Yang Bao, who lived in around the 1st or 2nd century. And it's a period known in China's history as the Han Dynasty. Well, Yang Bao was only 9 years old, and he happened to witness this yellow bird, it was a yellow finch, being attacked by an owl. So the yellow bird fell to the ground wounded, and then because it was probably bleeding, got attacked by the ants on the ground. Now, Yang Bao, who'd witnessed all of this, felt sorry for the yellow bird, and he immediately rescued the bird from the ants, and he sort of created a temporary home so there would be shelter for the bird to rest and recuperate. And he cared for the bird, fed it, and looked after it until it was well enough to fly again. And then he set it free. He released the bird. Now, not too long after releasing the bird, one evening, Yang Bao meets a young boy, and this boy is dressed in yellow robes. And the boy identifies himself as having been the yellow bird that Yang Bao had rescued. He said that he was an envoy, messenger from the Queen Mother of the West, and this was a deity often associated with Taoist thought. And so the boy said, I passed by your town on my way to Penglai County, another place, and I ran into difficulties. I was the one you rescued, and I thank you for saving my life. As a token of my gratitude, I give you these 4 jade rings, and these rings will help ensure that your descendants will be of fine character, and they will, become the highest officials in the land. And then after he said this, the young boy disappeared. So very mysterious. Now, Yang Bao, he was a scholar, he was a teacher, but he never actually served in the government, as a government official. It's said that when he was invited to join the court by Emperor Guangwu at the time, Yang Bao was already quite old, so he was too old to, serve in the government service himself. Yang Bao actually lived to his 70s, so he passed away having evidently enjoyed a long life. He saved the life of the yellow bird, and he's obviously enjoyed a long life himself. But turns out that his descendants were as successful as promised by the young boy in the yellow robes. How do we know this? Well, Yang Bao was the father of Yang Jin, the same Yang Jin that we talked about last week. Now, Yang Jin rose to prominence. He served in many high positions, including as minister for ceremonies, and also as the commander-in-chief. And as you might remember, the historical records for that period of time in history, it actually commended the Yang family for their impressive record of service, because it wasn't just Yang Bao who became the commander-in-chief. It was Yang Bao's son, Yang Bing. It was his grandson, Yang Ci, and also his great-grandson, Yang Biao. They all were able to serve as commander-in-chief, this extremely high position in the government service at various times in their careers. So this was very impressive record of service. And I think that really goes to show how, one individual, their kindness, their good deeds can make a difference to their life and, bring good fortune to several generations of their family. And I think whenever I read about this account, it certainly makes me feel very grateful for my family ancestors, including my parents, for all the good fortune that I experience in my life. Whether that's enjoying good health or academic success or meeting good teachers and mentors in my career. So I think that there's a lot of reasons to be grateful. Now, clearly there are many benefits to being cultivating the good deed of being compassionate to all creatures. And, as Yang Bao's example shows, even a child can do this. Okay, now let's take a look at the next sentence. Just share the next slide. The next slide is be faithful, filial, friendly, and fraternal. You could say that this sentence covers actually all of the foundation for all of the moral qualities of an individual. And you might recognize that these virtues, these moral virtues, are central to the Confucian thought tradition. Well, in this text, in the Exalted Treatise, it shows that, well, the same virtues are also very much emphasized in the Taoist tradition of thought. In fact, being faithful, filial, friendly, and fraternal resonates with many of the world's ethical and religious traditions. Okay, I'm going to focus in the time that we have left. I'm going to focus on the first two prescriptions, being faithful and being filial. So, what does it actually mean to be faithful? I'll just stop sharing. Okay. What does it mean to be faithful? Well, it means that a person does their very best in serving their superiors, the leaders, and the elders generally in the community. So it's not limited to the family context. Now, this idea of faithfulness is very much rooted in filiality, or otherwise known as family reverence. And what is being filial about? Well, that's doing our best in service of our parents and our family. Okay, so faithfulness relates to superiors, elders in the community. Being filial relates to our parents and, within the family, family members. So, okay, how is being faithful linked to being filial? They seem to relate to two different things. Well, if you think about it, when a person, what a person does in service to the community, in service to their superiors and the elders within the community, very much reflects on their family, their parents. And, the classic of family reverence explains that being filial starts with a person looking after themselves, their own health, and keeping away from harm and injury, so their parents don't need to worry about them. Our parents have enough to worry about. They don't need to worry about our own health. But that is just a starting point. Just as important as keeping healthy is developing good ethical character. And that's important because having this good ethical character means that we can bring benefit to our parents and our family. We can bring benefit to our superiors and elders when, in serving the wider community. And this is because this having the good ethical character means that we set the right example for others. And we're able to make a positive contribution to society in whatever path or career that we choose to pursue. Okay, so this is generally understanding the idea of faithfulness, being faithful, and how it relates to being filial. Now, it's important to remember that being faithful, this idea of faithfulness, is not tied to any particular person or political party, but it's really to do with our being faithful to the state and the community at large, the general public. In the past, people would aspire to serve in government positions, to serve in the state and its people through the government service. But in today's terms, in our society, if you think about it, almost every organisation out there ultimately serves the community in some way. I'm not just talking about charitable organisations, not-for-profits like hospitals or schools, but even private businesses and profitable companies run for a profit. Well, they are really only able to prosper by serving the community in some way. And by being working for, or otherwise being part of those organisations, we are able to be faithful in serving the general public too. So, okay, but what does being faithful to our superiors or to our organisation really involve? Okay, in more specific terms, it means, this is according to the commentary on the Exalted Treatise, it means that a person is dutiful and responsible with whatever duties that they're entrusted with. It means that they are punctual, they're diligent, and they're proactive. So they are willing to offer suggestions if they can identify better ways of doing things. And of course, they will also, check with their superiors whether, those suggestions, those good ideas, what the organisation has in mind. There's a difference between trying to apply our initiative and going off and doing our own thing. Well, a faithful employee will also think and try to plan ahead and give timely advice to their colleagues, especially their superiors. They're able to anticipate and address potential problems before they become actual issues. And when issues arise, as they sometimes inevitably do, these faithful employees are able to assist in resolving those problems. They don't try to seek to lay the blame on others. And when their superior happens to be wrong about something, well, a faithful employee will not hesitate to offer constructive feedback and guidance, and they will be there to help their superior make more informed decisions, better decisions. So, okay, that probably sounds pretty instinctive, pretty straightforward. What are some of the obstacles that might, stand in the way of a person being faithful to their superiors? Why might some people find it difficult to follow this particular direction? Well, the commentary on the Exalted Treatise, it identifies two common stumbling blocks. And the first is self-interest. Now, this is where a person fails to do what's really in the best interests of, their organisation or, the community, wider community, because they care more about their own ambitions, their career, their own interests, basically. Could be to do with their personal connections, their family, etc. So they might be more inclined to take shortcuts and pick and choose the tasks that they want to be involved with, the tasks that they're willing to do. Because, they're more interested in the tasks that are less taxing, less stressful. The less time and effort involved, the earlier they can start their weekend, for example. Whereas a faithful employee might only take half a day to finish the job. Another person might deliberately take all day so they don't need to take on further jobs, further tasks. We're starting to get at the idea. A person might be so anxious to try to maintain their current role, their current job, and the income and the authority and the prestige that comes with it, that they won't want to risk upsetting their superiors by providing that constructive feedback, or speaking up, letting them know when the organization has made a poor decision, because at the end of the day they're worried about being demoted, losing their job, if they upset their boss. After all, no one likes to hear that they've made a mistake or done something wrong. So one major stumbling block is self-interest, and the other stumbling block is personal bias. So that's where a person makes decisions based on their grievances, grudges, enmities, or factional arrangements where they, toe the party line. And clearly this isn't really the recipe for decisions that will be in the best interests of that organization necessarily, or the rest of the community. Now, there's a good story that comes from the start of a text called the Zuo tradition of commentary on the Spring and Autumn Annals. It's a very long title, but it's basically a historical classic. It's based on the records of the state of Lu, where Confucius comes from. And the records that relate to the spring and autumn period when Confucius lived. This particular account relates to the year to 772 before the Common Era, and relates to the ruler of the state of Zheng, a ruler by the name of Lord Zhuang, and his younger brother called Gongshu Duan, and their mother called Lady Jiang. These three main characters. Well, their mother, Lady Jiang, persuades Lord Zhuang to grant his younger brother the city of Jing for his estate. So he has, a piece of land that will provide, the taxes to support himself. Well, this was, of course, within Lord Zhuang's power and authority to do so, and he does so as instructed by his mother. But the problem was that the city of Jing was fairly large, and the Lord's advisors actually warned him that that city was, more than the customary area of an outlying city. And they were worried about this because, Gongshu Duan, the younger brother, might become a potential threat to the stability of the state later on. So, so they were worried. Well, as it turns out, Gongshu Duan, he commanded the western and northern marches, these troops, to switch their allegiances to him instead of his older brother. And he sort of marshals provisions and prepares infantry and chariots to attack the capital. So he wants to take action against his brother and, I guess, try to seize power. Clearly things were getting out of hand. In fact, Lady Jiang favors her younger son. It's arranged for her to open the city gates for him Now, with things getting so out of hand, Lord Zhuang moves to put down this rebellious activity, and his younger brother sort of ends up fleeing the state, fleeing from the territory. Well, you can imagine Lord Zhuang was so upset, with his family members. He was so upset with his mother that he swears an oath. He says that until we reach the Yellow Springs, we will not see each other again. So clearly he doesn't want anything more to do with his mother, and he doesn't want to see his mother, in this lifetime. The Yellow Springs is a sort of a subterranean world, a sort of an underworld, where it was believed that the dead spirits would go. So until the Yellow Springs, and he doesn't want to see his mother anymore in this lifetime. But shortly after swearing this oath and sort of breaking off all contact in his relationship with his mother, Lord Zhuang comes to regret this. There's a border official by the name of Yin Kaoshuo, and when Yin Kaoshuo hears about these events, he goes to offer some gifts to Lord Zhuang, and in return, Lord Zhuang grants him a meal together. While they're eating during this meal, Yin Kaoshuo sort of puts aside the meat, and this makes Lord Zhuang very curious. So the Lord asks him why he's doing this. And Yin Kaoshuo, he replies, he says, "Your humble servant," referring to himself, "your humble servant has a mother. She's always partaking of my meals, but she has never tasted my Lord's stew. May I seek your permission to give some to her?" Hearing this, Lord Zhuang, he certainly reminds him of his strange relationship with his own mother, and he replies very sadly. He says, "You have a mother to give things to, but alas, I alone have none." And Yin Kaoshuo, asks, "What do you mean? What's the matter?" And the Lord explains the circumstances and how much he regrets his oath swearing that oath never to see his mother again in this lifetime. Well, Yin Kaoshuo has a solution. Yeah, he has a good idea. He says, "Look, there's no need to worry. All you need to do is dig into the earth as far as the springs go. And then, you and your mother can meet each other in the tunnel underground. And then no one will be able to say that, you went against your oath." So he comes up with this great idea, and for the Lord Zhuang to be reunited with his mother, and the Lord takes up his advice and actually meets his mother in the underground tunnel, and they're reunited. So he's able to restore their relationship between mother and son. And Yin Kaoshuo is particularly commended by the text for being someone who was obviously a filial son, someone who cares a lot about his mother, and also a faithful servant. So not only did Yin Kaoshuo loved his mother and, was a good example, a positive example for Lord Zhuang, but he was able to help Lord Zhuang repair the relationship with Lady Jiang, with his mother. So that's, you can sort of see how the concepts of being faithful is linked to being filial. And I suppose this brings us to the next part of the sentence, being filial. And being filial obviously starts with loving and caring for our parents. But this is just the start. Obviously, we try not to make them worry about our health. We want to be responsible in our studies, in our work, in our relationships. We try not to make our parents worry about us. They already have enough things to worry about themselves. So now as we grow older, being filial might mean looking after, ensuring that our parents are physically healthy and their well-being. And look, it might involve they have to take medication, maybe supporting them to make adjustments to their lifestyle or their diet so they don't need to rely on the medication long term. As a person's body gets older, when you take medication, there are inevitably side effects. And those side effects just get worse as a person's body ages and gets weaker. So that might be something that something that we can do in being filial. It means ensuring that they live in a secure and comfortable environment. Now, this doesn't have to mean that we take out a mortgage and buy a big new place for our parents. It means, they might be perfectly happy living in the same house that they've lived in for decades. It's a place that they're comfortable, they're used to it. It's convenient for all of their needs. So it's very much, being filial is very much taking into account the preferences of our parents. And it also means, aside from the material aspect, looking after their mental health and their spirituality. So, maybe they're retired now and they have more time. Maybe they want to spend more time learning about their faith and with their spiritual cultivation. So they're clear-headed about where they would like to go in the next life. And, well, at the very least, we want to ensure that our parents never feel left out or ignored or neglected, at the very minimum. Now, as I said before, looking after our parents is caring, love, respect for our parents is just the beginning. And this idea of caring and respectfulness extends to everyone else. We try to be dutiful and fulfill our moral obligations in all of our interpersonal relationships. How do we do that? We try to fulfill our responsibilities without seeking requite or reward or even respect from the other person. In fact, being filial is all-encompassing. You could say that there's no moment when we can't action the virtue of being filial. Let's think through a few scenarios. Let's say, today many of us work in an office environment. We sit at a desk, we're working with a computer, we might be in front of a screen for many hours in the day, most days of the week. So do you think doing things like sitting up straight, adopting a correct posture, is that part of being filial, do you think? Well, I think the answer is yes, because when people don't do those things, when they don't follow the occupational health and safety guidance over an extended period of time, they might find they suffer from sore eyes, sprained wrists, stiff shoulders, all sorts of aches and pains. And clearly that is really not looking after their health. So, the parents will be worried, all of their loved ones, their own family members might be worried about them. The situation, those problems have implications for their health and well-being, of course, but it also affects their ability to continue on in that job. And that's another cause of worry. So, how we work counts as part of being filial. We can think about when a person is rushing somewhere. Let's imagine there's a pedestrian crossing about 100 meters down the road, where the traffic lights are. And where we want to go is actually just on the other side of a very busy road. Let's say we're pressed for time. We're rushing because we're running late to try to catch the bus, and we just cross the road. We don't go to the pedestrian crossing. Is that part of being filial? Does being filial come into any part of this equation? The answer is yes, because when we put ourselves in harm's way, we're obviously not meeting the minimum criteria for not making our parents worry about our health. Well, more than that, we could maybe cause a car accident or seriously disrupt the other road users. When we rush out onto the road, imagine the driver has to suddenly apply their brakes. We're obviously not setting a positive example for others, including children, who might think, well, it's okay not to use the pedestrian crossings now. So the question is, why do we need to rush and try to take shortcuts, dangerous shortcuts? If we could be a little bit more organized, maybe we could leave the house a bit earlier, and then we wouldn't need to rush in the first place. The same applies to driving. Do we really want to run the red light and put ourselves in harm's way in that way? That's another scenario where clearly is part of being filial. Another scenario might be when our friend confides in us with their personal circumstances. It might be some troubles in their family, could be a personal illness or some problems at work. Do we go and tell others? Because we've got information that others don't. Is that part of being filial? Well, the answer is no, we shouldn't go and tell others. And yes, it is part of being filial, because being filial to our parents trains us to be considerate and thoughtful to other people. Like I said, as I keep repeating, we don't want to cause harm and injury to ourselves, because we're thinking of our parents, right? We don't want to make them worry. Well, in the same way, we need to put ourselves in the position of our friend. A friend probably wouldn't want us to share their personal information, like gossip. We don't need to sign confidentiality agreement because the very nature of that information implies that it shouldn't be shared. And we all know that strong friendships are based on trust, right? If we're divulging our friends' secrets, talking about them behind their back, well, that's not being very trustworthy. And I think it would seriously make our parents worry if we struggle to maintain strong friendships and good relationships with other people. I think it would definitely make our family members, not just our parents, worry about us. So that's another scenario where being very much related to being filial. We can think about teamwork in the workplace. Anytime we have to work in a team, we'll come across colleagues who pick and choose what they want to do. They might pick the easier tasks, the tasks, the jobs that don't involve much time pressure, and leave the hard cases for others, for example. What's complex or challenging, or the jobs that have already been put off and now need to be done so urgently that they have to be done before lunchtime. The deadlines become super urgent. So is working well in a team part of being filial? I think I would say yes. Trying to get away with doing less is not being faithful to that organization or the wider community. It's not being considerate. We're being selfish because we only want to do what we want to do. We're not actually doing what needs to be done, and we're not being considerate or fair to anyone else. So, those sorts of people might find it difficult to get along with others. And their parents, their family will be worried about them, whether they'll actually be able to hold down that job for any period of time. Now, as I mentioned before, being filial starts with caring for and respecting our parents. But it goes much further, as we can see in the text called the Classic Family Reverence. And I'm going to share the next slide, and which has this is a passage from the Classic Family Reverence. The master said, and this is referring to Confucius, one who loves their parents will not dare to despise others, and one who reveres their parents will not dare to be arrogant to others. Okay, and this was actually an expression of how a sovereign, like a state leader, will put their filiality or their family reverence into practice. Now, how does this work? Why does caring for and respecting, revere means respecting our parents, why does that mean that we don't despise or look down on others? Well, being filial trains us to care for and respect for our parents, certainly, but to develop a broader caring, compassion and respectfulness for everyone. There'll be people who we don't get along with, who might not be our friends. There might be team members who don't contribute or pull their weight. Can we despise them or look down on them? Well, the answer is no. Being filial means we try to set a good example for them to help them understand their responsibilities to the team too. Sometimes it could be working through, communicating through a proxy, someone who they're more likely to listen to and learn from. It doesn't have to be us directly. Let's say you have a friend with a mental health problem and you happen to be their only friend. Let's say they ring you up from time to time, you try to help, but it can be seriously draining, talking to them. Well, does that mean you give up on your friend and, not care, look down on them? Well, actually, the answer is no. Being filial means that if we have the opportunity, if our friend trusts us enough, we can try to involve their family members and health professionals so they have a proper support network with professional care for them. It's about doing things like that, and certainly from the perspective of a state leader. When you're thinking about a whole country of people, there'll be people who don't contribute. Maybe they're unemployed or unable to contribute in some way. Maybe they've broken the law, they've committed a criminal offence. Well, the state leader still has to care and respect those people. They do so by ensuring maybe that there is job training and job opportunities available, that there are fair processes to deal with people who have broken the law, criminals. At the end of the day, from the sovereign's perspective, they fulfill their duty of being filial and perfect this duty by when they don't sort of complete and fulfill this duty when everyone is able to be harmonious. When everyone in the community cares for each other and respects each other. And this is because traditionally, as the state leader, you had a moral obligation to educate your people, to set the right example and ensure that they're educated to understand their moral obligations, to love and respect each other. Well, from the perspective of an ordinary citizen today, we're not the state leader, we're not a sovereign. What can we do? Well, I think it's about having a basic caring and respect for others, for their human dignity, for their the human potential, the potential as human beings, in the value and worth of their life. So that basic level of caring and respectfulness. And, this sets a positive example for everyone else. And it could be as simple as just common courtesy, holding the door open for others, saying thank you, giving someone our undivided attention when they're trying to talk to us and tell us something. Now, you might think, well, actually, I already do this. This is very simple. How could it mean so much? Well, actually, it's, yes, those actions, we might already be doing them on a day-to-day basis, but it's the heart that we bring to those actions. And that goes to the core of whether we are cultivating good deeds. And in particular, there's the good deed here of being faithful and filial, and we'll go into the next elements, the next parts of this sentence next week. But it's important to reflect on the heart that we bring when we're cultivating the good deeds, whether it's being compassionate towards all creatures, or being faithful and filial. And hopefully I've given you some food for thought about, trying out these good deeds for ourselves in our day-to-day practice. So I want to thank you very much for your kind attention, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much indeed.